It's going to be a great series regardless. As you guys can see, we are loaded in. And over here on the left top side of our first map of this awesome best of 5, it is the one and only Captain America himself. Of course, it's Polt.
One of the most successful players that we've had here in the top 16. And his opponent in the bottom right, representing SK Telecom T1, is the Red Protoss player Classic.
It's definitely been a year of second places for Polt. He got multiple second places. He got a second place in the Battlegrounds in Detroit, second place at MLG Anaheim, second place at the Battlegrounds North America. Overall, all very good results. Of course, second place at the Intel Extreme Masters in Cologne as well. The only time these two players ever played against each other. Polt mentioned it, and he also said he won 3-2 back then, but completely different map pool with different styles in this matchup. I don't think that's a result that we should look too much into either, but it's definitely it was a nice victory for Polt because it was a victory that was not expected by many.
Yeah, Polt was successful in a time where Terran players were struggling against Protoss. He was one of the very few players that had a slightly unorthodox way of dealing with things, but still managed to make it work regardless. In Classic, these days Protosses haven't been toppling the Terrans as much as before. We've seen a good amount of Terran success, a lot of aggressive play, SCV pull builds from Terrans in the mid-late game stage. But Polt's not one of those guys. He's going to open up about as economically as you can, command center first before any barracks production. In Classic, he's going to put a second pylon in his natural. Maybe he's trying to fool an SCV scout.
Yeah. We could say not super shocking, but a command center first on Kingston Junction is not something we see all the time. And Classic is going to be relatively pleased, I guess, with his probe scout, because now he will be able to be annoying with his probe, just start buzzing away at his SCV, forcing Polt to at least maybe repair it or pull down another SCV eventually, because of course probes do regenerate the shields and SCVs don't.
Yeah, well, the one slightly interesting side effect of all of this is that because Polt, instead of sending his scouting SCV out, kept it in his base to defend against this probe, doesn't see that there's a weirdly placed pylon missing from Classic space, so he won't be tricked into thinking there's a proxy because he hasn't scouted the mind games.
This is a pylon that could still be used later for something, could also help out against some of those Hellion run-bys like you mentioned before, Nate, because it does block the path behind those mineral lines. So for now, Polt is going to be relatively pleased. He didn't lose too many minerals having to chase that probe around. Classic is going to follow this up with a relatively, just a normal Cybernetic squad there. I won't say quick, but everything very standard so far. I am so curious about his openings though, because we have seen so few of his Protoss vs Terran over the last few months that we have no idea. And he might actually show us a couple of crazy openers where he just rushes up to High Templars, or maybe does something with Immortals, something that's not super uncommon on this map. Perhaps not recommended against the 3-Rex opening that we see from Polt, but I wouldn't be shocked to see one Immortal built in this series.
Yeah, there's a couple of different things that Protoss players have been trying, and Polt's going to look around. I will say, Polt so far this year he's been a Reaper, man. He's loved to open with Reapers to get scouting information. He must feel comfortable against the style that Classics plays, despite there not being too much to see of him recently, that he doesn't feel like he needs to have that Reaper for scouting. So he'll have a little bit more economy because of the command center first, and that in turn leads to better early game production if he wants to do one of those 3-racks pushes around 7-8 minutes that he's kind of known for in this matchup.
Now this is already a little bit interesting as we see a pretty quick Twilight console going down. Of course there are many ways to play defensive with a Twilight console as well. There is nothing wrong with just getting a defensive blink, shutting some early aggression down, then trying to defend against the Medivacs and then just going up to Colossus. But there is also a chance that Classic decides to go a little ham, chrono boost out that blink upgrade and actually add a few more gateways in a phase in the game where we perhaps don't expect it and put on some serious pressure. But once more it's a 3-Rex opening for Polt, so if Classic would ever decide to be aggressive, I think that this is pretty much the opening that Polt wants to receive it with.
Yep, Blink is the weapon of choice for him, and that's the best part about these command center first builds. You get that second barracks fast enough that your Marine count is still pretty good. You have a lot of mid-game pressure opportunities. Now this Marine poke, against any normal build, it's not bad, but you're opening with Stalkers, you have mobile units, you have your Mothership Core for Photon Overcharge. You really shouldn't be able to get much out of this. You're not going to catch a Sentry off guard or a Zealot or anything like that.
Yep. I don't think he wants to use Photon Overcharge too quickly, but if these Marines go in too deep, then I think he definitely will activate it. Will Polt go all the way? Nah, But now he's kind of already in an awkward position because these Marines are going to absorb quite a few shots from these Stalkers. He will at least lose 2 Marines, I believe. And now, of course, Classic has to be careful because he has no high ground vision. Unless he would bring the Mothership Core, but he decides to keep it at home for now. It's a lot of Marines already, Nate.
Yeah, going for the robotics facility follow-up and taking the 2 assimilators in the natural shows that Classic isn't ready to commit to a serious all-in type play off of this Blink opening. You'll have the option for harass in the mid-game stage, but you still need to be careful, of course, because as you said, with this many forces, Polt could get aggressive himself, and then as a Protoss, you need to have everything back. Polt is not scared of Photon Overcharge. If you do not have enough units to save your Nexus, he will kill it. He will gladly trade away a few Marines to pick off your base.
One would say that he does not respect Photon Overcharge like it should be respected.
No. That's been a recently trend in this matchup, man. Like we Terrans are figuring it out. You can take out these bases if the Protoss doesn't have enough gateway units left to defend. So far, everything looks pretty standard. This third base is, you could say, adventurous, but you have the mobility from the Blink Stalkers, and the Colossi will be coming out soon.
I do still want to say it's adventurous, though, against the Terran like Polt. Now, of course, it's going to be really interesting to see if Polt will decide to add barracks number 4 and 5 before he goes for Command Center number 3. Because if he does that, he's going to have a lot of units to work with, and he should potentially be able to put some serious pressure on Classic. Of course, Classic is going to try to keep Polt on his side of the map with these Blink Stalkers, but that is a risky... That is a risky maneuver in general.
And it's a dangerous game to play because there's the 2 different directions the Stalkers could potentially come up in, and now Polt's like, well, I want to leave my base. And the Observer's going to see this. He might want to start this 3rd command center now on location, but that Observer, I wonder if Polt sees it. I wonder if that's like triggered him. He's like, is he going to come up from here? A good picking this off would be nice.
He knows it's there. Even,
oh no!
Oh my god, forward blink immediately by Classic. Gets one of the medevacs, goes for medevac number 2 as well, but he will lose a couple of Stalkers in the process though.
That's a phenomenal pickoff for Classic, getting 2 medevacs at a phase in the game where Polt has his 3rd base so much later than Classic. He loses all of his aggressive potential. There's absolutely no way that he can really put pressure on without really committing himself against Classic.
Yep. Great snipe there. Was a little bit risky at first because there were still a couple of Stim Marauders, so that could snowball pretty quickly, especially when your blink is on cooldown. But in the end, he only lost 3 Stalkers there, so I would definitely trade 3 Stalkers for 2 medevacs and a handful of bio units. Well done there by Classic, and this sort of allows him to get away with that ridiculously quick 3rd base, because let's not forget, that went down at 8 minutes and 45 seconds. Just to put things in perspective, when Stardust was playing against MMA on Nimbus, he didn't have a 3rd base at the 16-minute mark, Nate.
Yeah, he's got a great economic setup, and the problem now for Polt is if you want to build medevacs, these Colossi just become exponentially better. There's no Vikings, you can't build them because you need those medevacs back, otherwise you can't harass. This allows him to get double forge at the same time. Classic still playing around with a small number of units, but with access to Photon Overcharge and couple good force fields, he can still make a big play.
Yep, this time Polt will retreat for now, and he doesn't have those additional medevacs to do also some dropping in maybe the natural or in the main base instead. As you can see, these bio units could have potentially been loaded up into medevacs, and that would have made Classic's life already a little bit more difficult, because if those units unload, it's going to be very difficult for Blink Stalkers to fight them straight up. Of course, Blink Stalkers are great at sniping stuff, but if they actually have to fight in a straight up engagement, well, that's not really where they excel.
Yeah, and especially without those medevacs, now you're always in that spot where the Stalkers can very easily chase you because they have Blink. And Classic, I really can't say, like, there's not too much here that I don't like for him. As long as Polt isn't able to find somewhere to drop in with a big drop and maybe snipe a Nexus or those forges somehow.
I really think it's beautiful, but I also think it's extremely risky that he puts these 4 very important
on
buildings
one pylon,
all next to each other. It's a Twilight Council, a Robo Bay and his 2 forges all in this beautiful little a square area, I guess you could say. But that's if Polt would ever be able to get a couple of medevacs in there, things would definitely get very dicey. But it's also a position that if Polt wants to go in there, it's very hard to ever leave because he's in the middle of basically 3 bases.
Yeah, I gotta give credit to Polt though. He has good Viking production. He has his 2-2 upgrades actually starting before Classics. Now Chrono Boost will let him catch up and potentially move ahead as the game progresses on. But there shouldn't be any serious advantages for Classic. He just has the comfort of that earlier third base, which makes him pretty much unattackable as long as he keeps his army positioned between the three of them.
Gives him a lot of comfort as he's already going up to Storm at the 13-minute mark while upgrading on 2 Forges, and of course having Blink Stalkers, having Charge on the way, and having pretty solid Colossus production. That's of course, if you have access to that 5th and 6th assimilated that the third base will give you, you know, life becomes a little more beautiful if you are a Protoss player. Suddenly you do have gas for all the good things in life. Polt in general is not really a Terran player that will pull SCVs all the time against Protoss. You can't say that he will never do it, but he's definitely not...
I mean, he does it probably less than any other Terran player out there. If you are Classic, you can go into a series like this and you can almost kind of gamble a bit on Polt not pulling those workers, and you just sit on your 3 bases, you'd be very comfortable, you get up your tech, you don't worry about being overwhelmed by that worker pull, and that lets you play a little bit greedier sometimes. But now Polt, he's hunting for some way to get an edge in this game. He has an army on the left side. Here comes a big drop to the right. Is he just going to go straight away for this Nexus? The 4 medevacs unload. He's got the army cut at the third base. Storm hitting the Vikings, but not really hitting a whole lot. The Vikings are falling quite quickly. He trades up for the Colossi, and in the natural expansion, Polt still has a few units chewing away.
Oh, these bio units getting so close to both of these Colossus actually. Did not expect them to be that exposed. In the end, Polt does not get a base though, but he did definitely reset the Colossus count.
Yeah, that's a fantastic catch for Polt as his Ghost Academy is now done. The only negative, of course, is that when you lose those Vikings, you can't afford to replace them and get Ghosts often at the same time. 2-2 upgrades are finishing at the exact same time for both players though, and Polt still has some active forces out on the map.
Yep, I don't think that Classic can just counterattack over here. This army is not as strong as it looks. It's a lot of Zealots. There are a few Storms, and that definitely complicates things a little bit. And this one Colossus actually makes life a little bit more complicated as well. One single sentry.
Yeah, I mean, he cuts off a couple of the Bioforces, but it's not enough to warrant a Storm. The next one only hits pretty much a Marauder. The Vikings are going to come up. There's not a ton of Stalkers, but there's not a lot of Vikings either. This is really fighting with just scrappy forces. His Ghosts are about to come out. If he waits for those, the EMPs will really set him up nicely.
That was actually an okay trade for Classic. He did end up losing the Colossus, but he picked up 4 or 5 Vikings in the process. That's a really good Zealot warp in. That's really going to mess the AI up from these Terran forces. Polt is going to have to retreat with all these units, which makes taking a 4th base even more difficult.
Yeah, this gives time for Classic's army to retreat as he takes a 4th base. Now, Polt is aware of Classic's 4th, as he has also landed his 4th command center, a single Marine trying to take that down as he builds a planetary fortress. But these Zealots, man, they are annoying as hell to deal with, and I believe that War Prism is still alive.
Yep, yeah, it is. I think he sent it to the left side over there. It's just hovering around the main base of Polt. Polt didn't really lose a whole lot of SCVs yet, but this is definitely not the type of play that Polt wants, the type of game that Polt enjoys playing. Polt likes to be the aggressor, and normally Terran is the aggressor in this matchup, but Classic just had a ridiculous amount of resources to work with because he went up to 3 bases at the 8-minute mark.
As Classic pushed Polt back, both players finished 2-2. Classic is now close to finishing his +3 upgrades, and Polt has only just barely started his +3 attack. So when these armies clash in the next minute or so, you're suddenly going to see a much better trade for Classic because of those upgrades, especially on the Zealots.
And cherry on the pie is always that second robotics facility. Life is very enjoyable as a Protoss when you can pump out Colossus 2 at a time and still spend all your resources while spamming Zealots in the main base as well and putting pressure on the 4th base. Wow!
Polt
Classic came to play, Nate.
Can't look everywhere at once, Roddy. This army is being pushed back. Now, Polt does have 4 medevacs going down the right side of the map. The Viking is looking to take out this War Prism, but the 5th base of Polt will be denied. Gets picked off. Now the 4 medevacs have unloaded inside the main base of Classic. Defensive Storms in position. Not able to finish these forces off just yet, though. Another one coming in.
Yeah, Storms should eventually be enough, as these medevacs don't really have any energy anymore. I think a couple of feedbacks went down. These Zealots will get cleaned up, but there is still a cannon helping out there as well. And now it's just Marauders remaining, so a couple of Zealots should eventually be more than enough for Classic to clean this up as well. Supply is still surprisingly close though, but of course, Polt did not get his... well, he does have this 4th base on the right top side actually.
Yeah, he's got that nice bit of mining, and that's really important. If Classic picks off, you know, Classic might have...
Wow.
Did he see that top right base, or did he think that he killed the 4th? That's it's very important that that Classic finds an opportunity to get something else done. He might not realize that Polt is even a position as he is.
I have full map vision, Nate, and I didn't realize it because there was a lot going on. This probe was sort of about to scout it.
Oh,
okay.
That's a good scout.
Man, that little probe.
He needed to see it.
I don't think he saw it.
Oh, no, okay.
He might expect it
Yeah,
now.
at this point, you might assume, but still, not seeing it earlier. That's the base you wanted to kill, not that center one.
Still though, very even in supply, 189 against 193, plus 3 attack. This just finished up for Polt as well. I must say I'm really surprised that Polt was able to keep his production so on the money. A couple of big storms going down over all these bio units. This dropped for 4 medevacs full of bio units.
Great target fire with the photon cannon to pick off that weakened medevac. And the army of Classic, perfectly placed to stop Polt from pushing in anymore. And now as a Terran player, you're going to have to rely on that big engagement victory with the EMPs on top of the Archons and Templar, and your Colossi focusing the Colossi with your Vikings.
Yeah, Polt in general, like, I do like his ghost control, but I don't think that's his biggest strength in this matchup. Like, Polt loves to run around with just bio units.
He doesn't even have any on the map right now. He's got 2 about to finish. His Viking count leaves something to be desired. He's got something like 7 against 5 Colossi. It's not really going to cut it. He's building 4 at a time, but still, you're going to want to get closer to 21, 24 Vikings before you want to take a fight.
You make a very good point there, and he's actually maxed out now. He's losing a few units here and there, so he's freeing up a little bit of supply for these Vikings, but he really need to free up more supply. You can't take a fight against 6 Colossus with just 6 or so Vikings. That's just not going to cut it, unless you know, they're a completely untouchable position. No more Warp Prism Arrest in the main base as well, always working on those reactors. I love how Classic is doing that, and I think that this Planetary Fortress should be down. A couple of storms will go down as well. Big drop in the main base, but there are photon cannons. There were a couple of defensive High Templars as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is still tough because that 4th base does get destroyed by Classic. The Colossi and Stalkers still stand. The Marines and Marauders inside the main base of Classic are in a nice choke point position to pick off some tech.
Wow.
These Zealots are actually having a really hard time with that +3 attack being done, and he's even going to go for the Observers as well. All those expensive units.
A couple of more High Templars running up the ramp right now. There's one High Templar that's dropping a couple of storms in the main base and actually landing key storms. Wow, that's making Classic's life a little bit easier. Of course, his army is still alive, but now perhaps eventually Zealots should be able to take care of it. I think plus, actually Shields is not going to finish up. Darkshrine gets picked off as well.
Well, I mean, he found that little space with all the tech buildings running, and that's you basically you can cut the head right off of this production. All of the tech structures placed.
No more High Templars. I would really go for the robotics bay. That's such a good building to pick up as well. I guess he just wants to get out of here, but there's still a couple Stalkers. Blink forward, gets at least one of the medevacs. A couple of units are left behind as well.
And Polt's going to set his sights on that left side base.
The action is ridiculous.
What's here to defend? A hell of a lot of photon cannons, and 2 of them unpowered immediately. He's just going to go for the pylons
he should go for the Nexus as well.
Yeah, if he gets this Nexus and gets out of dodge, Polt's been really digging his claws back into this game.
Oh man, the Archons are derping there a little bit as well. The factory really doing a phenomenal job in distracting these Archons. Now actually all of these Marauders will just get the hell out of there.
That factory is a true hero, right?
Yes.
He took one for the team.
Definitely. That's the only thing he could do, but hey.
Well, and now the Mule Hammer drops at this center base, and if Polt holds on to this...
He had one job, but he did it right. It has to be said.
You don't see the factory used a lot in this matchup. That's one of the most effective factory plays I've seen lately.
Classic has done a really good job in replenishing all of these gateways. Most of them are in his initial third base right now. So he will have some production again, but he doesn't have a Twilight Console anymore. He doesn't have a Templar Archives. I still would have really wished that Polt would have picked up the robotics bay. Even though, I mean, I guess he could just rebuild it, but still, it's such a nice building to
pick
I mean,
up. With 2 robotics facilities on the map, you're right. It gives him an incredible amount of production available to try to go and get that Colossus count up. Not cheaply done, but definitely nice. How many ghosts are we looking at? Just 2, and 5 Vikings against 6 Colossus.
Man, there are 10 High Templars on the map, and Classic has the majority of them with his army right now in the middle of the map. He at least has 5. 1 EMP will go down, actually a good EMP on a couple of these High Templars, but the Viking count is just not where it's supposed to be.
I mean, Polt's army is still spread out really well. He's limiting the amount of damage the area effect can do, but with so many Colossi, like you can't even just spread out and kill them because there's so many of them.
Yep, just too much damage output from those big boys, and Classic now takes a 50 supply lead for the first time in this game. Planetary Fortress is going to try to be a hero,
yeah,
but
Polt needs to hold on to this. There's only so much damage output from the gateway units in this forest, but those Colossi focus down the workers, which means no repair, and this fort is knocked down. Polt with no income left, taps